And it really is an absolute joy to be here for the very first of our, oh no, it's the second of our webinar series this year. That's right. The second of our webinar series this year, featuring David Nutt, Professor David Nutt, the head of neuropsychopharmacology from Imperial College. And David, it is such a privilege to have you with us again. David is an absolute legend, as all of you will know, and we will introduce him very shortly again as well. But before we do that, we just love to say hi to all of you and ask where you're from in the world. You might want to put something in the chat. Also, a hand up if you're new to Mind Medicine Australia, just a hand up if you're new to us. Wonderful. And I guess the rest of you have been to some of our webinars before. And we welcome you to this webinar. And we particularly acknowledge the wisdom keepers, the light keepers, the medicine healers who've brought us to this place. And we want to acknowledge all of those whose shoulders we stand on. Their ancient wisdom that is now becoming so important in this world where we've lost a lot of our connection to ancient wisdom. And we are very excited for today. You get the chance to ask David anything, though I think he's going to do a talk first, aren't you, David? And then you can ask him anything. Is that right? Sorry, David's speaking,
It's
Alan, but I can't hear him.
it's
Sorry?
just it's just ask me things.
Oh, it's asking you things today.
I think I
Cool.
yeah there's so much to share that I didn't want to condense it. So I want to talk to what people want to know about. So
Okay,
no,
that's wonderful.
ask me
Wonderful.
really ask me anything. Just don't mention my weight.
Uh, so Ilan, if we could put on the slides for a moment so that we can just do a quick introduction and just where we're at in Australia in terms of where we are with the medicines, that would be fantastic. And of course, it is Professor Nutt who was with us all the way from the launch of Mind Medicine Australia through to today. And he was the one who helped us to achieve what we did with the Therapeutic Goods Administration and the rescheduling of these medicines. So we really salute you, David. You're just awesome.
Well,
And
it was teamwork. It was very much teamwork.
it was teamwork. It was teamwork. And Ilan, could you move to the next slide, please? So just a reminder that we are focused on the use of psychedelic-assisted therapies within clinical environments, and our presentations are intended for educational purposes only. They do not constitute medical advice. The sessions are recorded and will be shared on our YouTube channel. And we welcome everyone. There's people here from, let me see, all over the place. Where have we got people from? New Zealand, Gold Coast, New Zealand, South Australia, Perth, Bristol, Townsville, Perth, Sunshine Coast, Mullumbimby, Perth, Austria, all over the place, really. So welcome all. And this slide is really the reason why we're here, because we have this giant mental health epidemic. It's the real pandemic if you think about it. 1 in 4 Australians have a mental illness. 1 in 6 Australians are on antidepressants, with 1 in 4 of those being people over the age of 55 years old. 1 in 30 children under the age of 18 and many as young as 4 are being medicated with psychiatric medications. And this comes at a massive cost to human life and potential. The amount of suffering in our community is unsustainable. And despite the best efforts of all the clinicians, and there's probably, who's a clinician on the call? You can all wave your hands and say hi. We acknowledge all of you and the incredible work that you do every day. And yet, despite all of those efforts, we've got blunt tools. Next slide, please, Alan. And so you can see here that there's been minimal improvement in treatment outcomes over the past 50 or more years. And in the case of depression, really only about 15% of sufferers experience remission from pharmacotherapy and or antidepressants and antipsychotic medications. Yeah, 30% experience remission, but a half of those are placebo. And many of those people experience serious side effects and withdrawal effects when they stop their treatment. In the case of post-traumatic stress disorder, as few as 5 to 10% of patients experience remission from existing treatments. So more of the same isn't going to solve the problem. Next slide. And so we set up Mind Medicine Australia in 2019 to focus on expanding the treatment options available to doctors and their patients through building a national ecosystem to support the rollout of psychedelic-assisted therapies. And that includes the world's leading training program, our CPAT program, which Reese, hi, say hi, give a big wave. Reese Flowers, the head of our CPAT
Hi,
education and
everyone.
clinical training, is
Welcome.
here. And David, of course, is on our faculty of CPAT, as wonderful others will show you in a moment. And many of you are probably CPAT graduates on here. And then, of course, we're focused on making access pathways available to patients, making sure that we have excellent quality medicine supplies, that we continue important and innovative research, because these medicines could be available for a whole range of other conditions, not just depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. And we're involved with a lot of clinical rollouts all around the nation. And of course, we made global history in 2023 through the successful rescheduling of psilocybin and MDMA, becoming the very first nation in the world to reschedule these medicines. So our goal is that these therapies become an integral part of our medical and mental health system. They become one of the first line treatments, that they continue to achieve the high remission rates they've been achieving of 60 to 80% after just 2 to 3 medicinal treatments with a short course of psychotherapy. You compare that 60 to 80% remission rates against the statistics I just mentioned on the previous slide, and we all start to realize just how many more people could be leading meaningful, happy, and productive lives. And of course, our goal as a charity is to make sure that these treatments are accessible and affordable to all Australians in need, no matter their financial circumstances or where they live. Next slide. Thank you, Alan. And this is what we've been doing. We've been building this national ecosystem. You can see on the left there, one of our key pillars is patient access. We have a patient support fund that also supports treatment costs for those in desperate need. We are the largest importer of the medicines in Australia. There are many patients now being treated. And Alan, have you got that slide showing where things are at in Australia? I'm hoping so, because I really want to show that. Oh, in a moment, in a moment.
Yeah, so that's the next slide. You'll see it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that. And there's also an application in place at the moment between Endwise and Mind Medicine Australia for the expanded use of psilocybin for palliative care. And we've launched a clinic called the Mind Medicine Australia Clinic in Abbotsford in Melbourne. And we also provide a whole range of consulting services to clinicians wanting to start up clinics, and people who need the medicines, and psychiatrists who need help to become authorized prescribers, and so on. And then another core pillar is awareness and knowledge building. So this webinar series, tonight's webinar series that we carry on throughout the year, is an extraordinary series. And we also have a whole lot of other education and awareness building, our world-leading training and research that I mentioned before. Next slide. Thank you, Alan. And this is what happened once we had this extraordinary historical moment in Australia on February the 3rd, 2023, when there was headlines all around the world about the fact that Australia had just become a leader in psychedelic medicines. Next slide, thank you. And this is where we are today. About 180 or more patients treated. There's over 50 authorised prescribing psychiatrists in Australia. Actually, there's more than 200 therapists working in clinical psychedelic-assisted therapies now. We must update that. And we have a number of authorised prescribers applications pending. We've started a patient support fund, which has supported over 12 patients so far. Medibank, one of our leading health insurers, is supporting customers who are relevant with financial support. Department of Veterans Affairs is funding treatments, as is the National Disability Insurance Scheme. And we've commenced a national registry supported by Mind Medicine Australia at ANU, Australian National University, to collect real-world evidence from patients. And David's been very instrumental in the setup of that registry. And there's a lot of trials going on all around Australia for other conditions that could be treated by these medicines, including anxiety disorder, OCD, end of life, anxiety, eating disorders, early cognitive decline, cluster headaches, fibromyalgia, and a whole range of other treatments. Next slide, thank you. And this is where you can see the development that's going on around the nation. So it's getting there little by little, step by step. Next slide, thank you. And then this is about our world leading certificate in psychedelic-assisted therapies. We just started our first intake for 2026 last weekend. We have a massively full cohort, and our next cohort restarts in July.
That's correct.
Yep, and we really welcome you to apply now, because a lot of people who applied for this cohort couldn't get in because it was booked out. And so we encourage you to apply as soon as possible. And applications are open to psychiatrists, doctors of all kinds, specialists, psychologists, psychotherapists, nurses, social workers, OC therapists, all registered allied health professionals, including Chinese medicine doctors, art therapists, yoga therapists, and all sorts of others. And there's David's comment. He says that he feels that our course is the leading course in the world. And thank you for that, David. Next slide, thank you. And this is our wonderful world leading faculty. You can see there people like Gabor Mate, Bessel van der Kolk, of course, David, Rick Doblin, Gita Vade, Ellie Kotler, and so on. And the next slide as well, which has more of our faculty. It's an extraordinary faculty. And our course is 14 weeks online, and then a 6-day intensive, which is many of the students who've done CPAT, in fact, the majority describe it as the best professional development training they've done in their entire careers. And you can see the testimonials on the CPAT website. Next slide, thank you. And then we have a shorter course, a 6-part online course, Fundamentals of Psychedelic-Assisted Therapies as well. But it's not nearly as in-depth as the CPAT course. And if you're a therapist, you're best off doing the CPAT training. Next slide, thank you, Alana. So there's lots of ways to help us, particularly fundraising and donating. We can't do this alone, and whether you can donate big or small, it all makes a huge difference.
It does.
It really does. And talk to your GPs and other therapists about these important therapies so that everyone gets used to these therapies and educates themselves and joins our educational webinars and so on. There's also lots of other ways to engage with us, and we welcome your engagement and your support. Next slide. Thank you, Alan. So this is about our patient support fund, and every single dollar donated to this goes straight to patients to help those who are in desperate need to access these treatments. Next slide. Thank you. And any donations we receive either go to the patient support fund directly, or if you want to just donate more generally, you can also help therapists who otherwise wouldn't be able to afford the training get some support. You can also help with research support and all sorts of other ways. Next slide. And we have an amazing, amazing schedule of events coming up. You can see upcoming events. There is the Bessel event there, Ilan. Is there a slide there?
And the Bessel event will be on the following slide, but Aris will put a link up to our events page in the chat.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you can go to the next slide then.
Sorry, that's it.
Oh, okay. So we are touring Bessel van der Kolk. Reese, I will ask you, Alan, later to put up a slide with the special discount code on it for the 10% if you could. So in fact, we'll put it in the thank you note to everyone after this webinar, and we'll offer you a 10% discount code to see Bessel van der Kolk in person in workshops in Sydney, Brisbane, Adelaide, and Melbourne. One of the Melbourne events is already sold out. So you need to get in quick, and it will be one-day workshops that will give you a great understanding of his work, the body
Okay, we have it.
score. Oh, thank you. And also other somatic work that Leisha Skye, his wife, who's an extraordinary somatic therapist, will be working with. And I'll be at these events as well, adding some vocals and some other things, some other special magic to this, as well as Benny Holloway. So we really invite you to join us at these special events. And now I'm going to hand it over to the professor, Professor Nutt. Welcome, Professor. We're going to highlight you on the spotlight now and invite people to ask questions, and Reese and Alan will moderate these questions.
Thanks, Tanya.
Thank you.
Lovely to be here. Congratulations again on phenomenal success. I'm envious the fact that you guys are leading the world and we're lagging behind in the UK, but then most other countries are lagging behind too. So there's still a lot to do, but we have made fantastic progress in the last 7 years. And I'm very happy to share any insights, knowledge about both either research or clinical practice or policy that any of you want. I think the best way to do this is probably for all of you to think of a question. If you put them into the chat, then Reese and Alan can perhaps sort them into themes, and I could maybe do a theme at a time. But while you're doing that, I'm quite happy. Let's kick off with the first person who wants to put their hand up. Let's start with a question. Yes.
Okay, the first one I'm seeing is how can psilocybin help long COVID?
Yeah, that's a great question. The answer is I don't know if it can. I'm not sure anyone's done a study, unless someone has. I presume there have been some individuals who've experimented with that. What I can say is that my charity, Drug Science, did the first study ever of a therapy in long COVID, and actually we used cannabidiol, and we found that CBD at a dose of up to 100 milligrams a day was actually it's clinically effective. That paper's published in British Journal of Clinical Pharmacology a couple of years ago. So I think it is possible to treat long COVID with that, but we were more targeting the anti-inflammatory benefits of CBD. I think it's plausible that psychedelics might help in long COVID, but does someone have experience?
My understanding is that the symptoms might be quite similar to fibromyalgia, and
Yes.
that there's some evidence for fibromyalgia. Is that correct?
Well, this is true. We have done a fibromyalgia study. We did a very as yet unpublished. It's been written up study was a placebo-controlled trial of 25 milligrams of psilocybin versus a placebo 1 milligram dose, our sort of standard placebo regime where everyone gets the same amount of therapy, just different doses of psilocybin, and we had quite a profound benefit in the fibromyalgia group. They had received the 25 milligram, the full trip dose, both in terms of reducing pain and also improving quality of life. So that was very, very, very positive. And when it's published, hopefully it'll give people.
私今日遅れます。はい。遅れて参加します。
I'll have to ask whoever that is to mute their microphone because we're getting some background noise. But thank you, David. The next theme that's come up is around how to treat severe developmental trauma, considering how hard that is to treat.
Yes, it's one of the big questions we're wrestling with at present, because what we have seen as we've done six different studies now with psilocybin, and also the recent one with IV DMT. Responses vary, and we don't fully understand why that is. We know that psychological impact of the trip is important. We know that powerful psychedelic experiences with a sense of being able to see beyond oneself, the more mystical, spiritual experiences, as suggested many years ago by the Hopkins group, seem to be important. And the Compass trials, at least the first analysis of the first Compass trial, confirmed that. So there's clearly an element of the psychological insight and experience of oneness with the universe. It seems to be important. But that doesn't explain everything. And one of the ideas that I've been sort of working on it currently is that I think the deeper the trauma, the more deeply entrenched the trauma is, and of course childhood trauma is the most deeply entrenched.
Yeah.
The harder it is to produce what you might call a kind of full recovery, and there are several different approaches to that. It may, of course, in none of our trials do we control the therapy before and after. So we basically, for economic financial reasons, we can only provide a treatment with some integrative sessions, 2 or 3 afterwards. It may well be that if we provided more intense therapy afterwards, we would get better outcomes. So my suspicion is that the people who have had very deeply seated trauma, although they respond, the trauma somehow although you don't fully eliminate the predisposition to the depression coming back. I think relapse rates are higher then, and they might need more therapy. And one of the interesting questions is what's the right kind of therapy for people with those early childhood traumas? And again, I'm not sure we know what that is, but some of you may know that I actually do a podcast on the Drug Science website. I do a podcast, and I've just recorded a very interesting podcast 2 nights ago with a man called Mark Solms. And Mark Solms is a South African who is a neuropsychologist, but he's also a psychoanalyst, and he's the curator actually of the Freud Archive now. And we had a very interesting discussion about the possible bringing together of psychedelics and psychoanalysis. So we listen to that when it comes out in a few weeks' time and think about it. He's just written a book called The Only Cure, which is a sort of history of psychoanalysis from a positive perspective rather than a sort of mystical way of therapists keeping people in treatment for decades. He's actually revisited quite a lot of the thinkings and the research of Freud, and he's certainly interested me in the idea that maybe the psychoanalytical approach, particularly to childhood experiences, may be potentially useful after a psychedelic experience. So that may be the way to go. So the answer is, I think that what we can say is that psychedelics often bring people back to a realization of the trauma that they've been repressing or denying. It allows them, in some cases, they get on top of it. I'll give you an example from the very first trial we did. One of our patients said during his trip, he saw his father abusing him, and he was able to actually get closure. He was able to say to his father, what a pathetic, horrible man you are. Now I realize why I struggle with my mood. You essentially damaged me, but now I can reject you and get closure from that. And he was one of the people that has stayed undepressed since about 2014. So it's 10 years. So it's not inevitably the case that childhood trauma is not something you can repair, but it's harder. And we need to, all of us, spend more effort in trying to explore how best to do that.
Sorry, David, can I ask this on that case there?
Yes.
So was that because the patient had further therapy, or is it because he had, I guess, more medicine? So there's this fine balance between the therapeutic aspect and the dosing aspect. And then what allows
we didn't give him
patient...
any more. He only had the one trip. We only had that first trial was essentially, it was actually everyone had a test dose of 10 milligrams,
Wow.
which people knew that happened, but the 25 milligram dose was the dose that produced the big change in over about half the people had very profound benefits, and some have stayed well after just a single dose. I'm not saying that he was kind of perfectly. He wouldn't have said he completely cured in any sense, but he was much more able to live his life, and he was able to function much better. With the depression never came back and commandeered his life as it did before, because like many of our patients say, that they still have the thoughts, but they're much more able to deal with them. And the reasons for that we're pretty clear now. The ability to think differently is because your brain is rewired in a way which isn't, so that you don't have the continual emphasis on negative thoughts. And we can see that change in rewiring, that change in flexibility. Just to share with you, I mean, some of you may have read a paper we published in Nature Medicine about 3 years ago, showing this physiological change in brain flexibility, which correlated with good outcome, and was only present in the group that had psilocybin, not in the group that had escitalopram. We've now and the paper's just actually literally, I think, being accepted this week. It hasn't come out yet. We've just redone that using another kind of analysis of cortical flexibility and confirmed that as well. So recovery does involve a different kind of brain connectivity, and it's certainly different from what you see with SSRIs.
Wow. While we're still on the topic of trauma, one of the next relevant questions is about moral injury. So you
Yeah.
normally think of PTSD as a very kind of fear-based disorder, whereas moral injury is more involving like the shame and betrayal. And, this person is wondering if there is a difference in the way that these therapies could work for moral
I think that
injury.
I completely agree. I think it's a really great question. I think it's completely plausible that therapies which help people understand themselves, and particularly sort of compassion-based therapy rather than word-based, cognitive-based therapy, might be much better for the moral injury. Absolutely. I think we should be really exploring all the opportunities that we have come across over decades of the different psychotherapies being developed. Totally agree with you. And but it needs people to do that, and it needs to be done in a it needs to be done ideally in a systematic way. It will be decades before we have full evaluation of different psychotherapies following a psychedelic treatment. But so the best way of gathering information now is for those of you who are therapists, who are using different therapeutic approaches, to share with us the outcomes. And that's why the Australian experiment is such a great experiment, because we're not constraining anymore the therapy. We're not trying to conform. So I talk about we in the grounds that I actually am one of the sort of overseers to some extent of the data collection. And this is real. This is the real world, and the real world is where people live, and that's where medicine is generally practiced. And we shouldn't be constrained by this absurdity of the FDA trying to insist that they can't even consider the psychotherapeutic elements. What we have to do is optimize therapy for our patients, and so learning from what you people are doing is really critical. And we by the way, we have created a facility for getting that kind of information out, because my charity is drug science, and it does research, and it does have a journal, and the journal is called the Journal of Policy. It's the Drug Science Journal of Science, Policy, and Law, and that journal is a free journal. You can go onto the website, you can download any of the papers that are there. We don't charge. We don't have any page charges for publishing there, and we're very open-minded. And if people want to write up case series where they've used a particular psychotherapeutic approach, this would be an ideal place to begin to get that information out. It's a lot easier in a journal like ours than trying to go to the conventional journals, which are now often quite hostile to psychedelic papers because they don't conform to the FDA criteria, etc. So yeah, moral injury is something we really should be focusing on and trying to develop optimized protocols for.
Thanks, David. I'm going to try and keep these roughly sequential so that, first in, first serve kind of thing. One of the next ones was about OCD, and if you're aware of the latest treatment or trials for it.
Yes, so there have been two studies. There's been our study, which was published last year, Pellegrini et al., and that was an unusual study. For those of you who don't know it, we used a low dose, a psycholytic dose, a 10 milligram dose of psilocybin, and compared with a 1 milligram placebo dose. And the reason we did that was because our expert patients, experts by experience patients, said they weren't prepared to have a full trip. We said to them, well, the likelihood is you will do better if you have a full trip, because we can potentially break down a lot of those ruminative, recurrent, inflexible thoughts that you have about health, etc. And they said, no, we're not prepared to do that. it was too scary, essentially. So we compromised and we said, well, if we gave you a psychoactive but non-psychedelic dose, would you be prepared to do that? And they were, and they did. And that 10 milligram dose did produce positive outcomes. For 2 weeks, there was a significant reduction in the Y box, the standardized score for OCD, on both on the compulsions and the obsessions. And the effect size was as big as an SSRI, but faster. So very typical to what we've seen when there have been other comparisons with SSRIs. What we're trying to do now, when we're in the process of writing a grant to see if we can fund that, is to see if we could maybe do that psycholytic dose 6 times over the course, say, of 6 months or 3 months, and see if we could get a bigger effect, gradually build on the effect, get a more enduring effect, because the effect only lasted a couple of weeks. And that actually, by the way, for some of you, you may not know that in the 50s and 60s, there was quite a lot of use of the this lower dose of psychedelics in therapy. It was given before psychotherapeutic interventions, and that's sort of what we did. And it was safe and well tolerated. But the group at Yale, they had a slightly different model. They did a milligram per kilogram dosing of psilocybin in OCD, and there they ended up with a dose which is about 20 milligrams. So not the dose that we routinely use, which is 25 milligrams. And so they did have some of them did have quite powerful psychedelic experiences, but perhaps not as challenging as the 25 milligram dose that we would normally have used. And their outcomes were actually better than ours and more enduring than ours. So it sort of supported the idea that we had that a trip dose would give you better outcomes. I'm not entirely clear how they managed to persuade their patients or encourage their patients to do that, but maybe we can learn from them. I am talking with them. And I think what I would say, I suppose the thing I would say was that I would be happy for people to have either. I think we should offer both, and if people won't take the 25 or maybe the 20, that's not easy to do with the current dosing regime, or the current tablet regime. But if not, then a lower dose. But I'm not even sure whether you can actually get a lower dose in Australia, so that might be quite tricky. So that might just still be a research target.
Although I will say there is a local OCD trial about to start with a team from the ANU. And I actually met with them yesterday. So I've put a link to that, in the chat, and they are struggling to fund patients suitable for the trial. So please do reach out via the website, or in fact, email me directly, and then I'll connect you with the recruitment team.
I think, yeah, the Yale, I think the Yale stuff isn't properly published yet, but I think that should be reassuring that it was tolerated, and what we need some patient experts from Yale to share their experiences now. I haven't seen that, but that would be helpful.
One of the next ones is about ayahuasca. Are you aware of much research and whether that's being considered as a treatment for anything?
Well, I think if regulators were prepared to accept combination of herbs as a therapy, it would probably be a very good therapy. I mean, there's clearly work being done. There's been work been done in South America. There's some of the earliest trials in depression were done with ayahuasca. There's been a trial in Spain as well. The problem is that our regulatory system is very, very restrictive to synthetic molecules, on the grounds that they argue that that's the only way you can guarantee what you're getting. And in fact, the UK, we're extremely harsh. We don't even have hypericum of St. John's wort, even though it's been a medicine in Germany for 30 years. And the argument that was used is that you can't guarantee exactly what you're getting in any herbal product. To which my response was, do you actually not know that the kinetics of synthetic medications are so variable? If you take an antidepressant and measure plasma levels, the plasma levels vary maybe 100-fold between patients with classical antidepressants, 100-fold. So to argue that you might actually get a variation of maybe 3 or 4% in a herbal preparation is actually kind of it's applying a different set of rules to herbs. So, but that's the way it is in many countries. I suspect it's the same in Australia. So it's probably not going to be a medicine in countries which rigidly apply the pharmaceutical approach that we do in the West. But I have no doubt it works. And of course, the study, some of you may have seen, we published last week, the first DMT depression study. We had to use it intravenously, which is not ideal. It worked,
Can
but
I
there are
ask why
the
can I
inconvenience
ask
of,
why you had to do it intravenously?
well, because that was the only formulation we could access. That's the only
Oh,
formulation that was approved. I mean, so you can give DMT, you can either smoke it, but there's no way any regulator or ethics committee is going to allow you to smoke something. So the
mm.
bottom line is, basically it's either IV, maybe you could get it. I mean, some of you may know that the 5-MeO DMT studies, that some of them are going through snorting. The kinetics of getting drugs into the body through snorting in the nose is actually really is variable. So, and that's why with the 5-methoxy studies, people have to do up titration, repeated snorts in order to get a full effect. So that's not ideal. So we did the IV DMT study. You can read about it. That was in Nature Medicine last week. The first author is Aritzo, who's one of the teachers on the course, so you'll meet when he comes to Australia later this year. He's my deputy at the Centre for Psychedelic Research at Imperial. And I mean, that study, we had to do it IV. It worked. The trips were quite short, about 20, 40, 30, 40 minutes. An ayahuasca trip is obviously quite a lot longer. I suspect that longer trips may give a better outcome. We can't prove that. It almost probably would be impossible statistically to do it because of the powerful effect even of the short trips. But I think people should have the option. But at present, they're not going to have the option because of the block that, as I say, Western regulators have on herbal products. But I don't think there's any question ayahuasca works. And there's so many testimonies now from people in the UK and America, Canada, who go and have ayahuasca trips in Mexico or South America for trauma disorders that they work. So I don't think there's any doubt ayahuasca works. And we know how it works because it's just a way of drinking DMT. And it works better. Some people would say, well, maybe the harmaline, which is the other agent which allows the DMT to be active when it's drunk, maybe that also helps, and it might do too.
Very interesting. One of the next ones is, what is the future of neuro-affirming therapy in psychedelic-assisted therapy?
I don't know what neuroaffirming therapy is.
So I might come back to that one, but I think it's neurodiversity, seeing people more for their strengths rather than their weaknesses.
Oh, well, if you're talking about can psychedelics help people with neurodiversity, the answer is almost certainly. And yet, I mean, I like to quote the example of Paul Stamets. You've probably all heard of Paul, who's a great guy, great friend of mine. A man who put medical mushrooms right back in the front of on the front of the newspapers. Why did he do that? He did that because he took a mushroom trip, psychedelic psilocybin mushroom trip, and he lost his stammer. And that makes perfect sense because what we know about what psychedelics do in the brain, it's perfectly predictable that it would improve stammer. He discovered it and became obviously a convert to the use of mushrooms for a range of different disorders. And it's completely plausible that the effects of psychedelics, which are twofold, disrupting ongoing processes, and a lot of stammering is a habit, and also producing neuroplasticity, so allow people to lay down new ways of their brain thinking. Those two together would be the ideal treatment for stammering or other disorders. And I've had people write to me saying how their dyslexia and their dyspraxia has been dramatically improved by having a mushroom trip. And I think that is completely plausible. And I'm working with ophthalmologists in Oxford now to see if we can use the neuroplasticity of psychedelics to accelerate the learning of the unlearning of a condition called amblyopia. Some people have a squint, and it's quite difficult to rectify that. But there are techniques, and we're thinking that the psychedelics might facilitate the acquisition of the brain processes to allow uh, the brain to rectify the squint. And obviously the big trial that's going on at present, that I guess most of you won't know about, is the trial. We're doing a 6-hour sub-psychedelic infusion of DMT intravenously in people who've had strokes. And we're doing that to try to maximize neuroplasticity. People who had a stroke within a month, they're having this infusion to see if it can accelerate the recovery from stroke through the neuroplasticity effect. So yeah, there's huge possibilities for psychedelics in a whole range of neurodiverse, either genetic or acquired disorders.
Very nice. Okay, so I love this next question. What is the phenomenological difference between a brief psychotic break and other types of psychedelic experiences? Is it one's mood, insight, the ability to recognize they are tripping versus a set belief?
Yeah, I think it's the paranoia. I think it's the paranoia which that really does differentiate them. I mean, and in terms of brain imaging, what we see of it is that psychotic symptoms tend to be driven more by subcortical dopaminergic function. And so, there's some rather good papers, imaging papers by Mark Laruelle, looking at basically the basal ganglion neuronal circuits, which seem to be the dopamine circuits, which seem to be highly implicated in psychotic states. We don't see any particular activations there in relation with psychedelics. Psychedelics are largely cortical because the receptor, the 5-HT2A receptor that serotonergic psychedelics like psilocybin, LSD, DMT work on, that's a cortical receptor. That receptor is not just a cortical receptor. That receptor, and when you hear my talk, which some of you will come to when you go on the course, the cortical 2A receptor is almost congruent with the human parts of the brain, the parts of the brain which are uniquely human. And we wrote a paper a couple of years ago, Lipper et al. In Brain, suggesting maybe the 2A receptor actually was critical to the evolution of the human brain and the patterning of the human brain, which makes that massive expansion of the human brain so powerful and makes humans human. The 2A receptors are located in the parts of the brain which do all the very high level things that only humans can do. And that sort of supports McKenna's idea that maybe the early hominids ate mushrooms and their brains grew bigger. I mean, and that's the stoned ape theory. It's can't prove that, but it's certainly not. You couldn't say it's crazy. But what we can say categorically is that psychedelics change the parts of the brain which are where we do the very human level thinking, analysis, reflection, understanding, etc. And why are they there? I'll just divert a bit because this is a question I've thought a lot about. Why would you have so many of these receptors in the parts of the brain where you do your very high level thinking? And one suggestion I would put to you is this: is that because they're not doing much most of the time, as far as we know, because we know if we block them. And some of you may not, well, none of you will know this, but my first experiments with these 2A receptors were done in 1984 when we blocked them. The first thing we could actually do before we really knew we were able to use psychedelics was to use antagonists. And these antagonists, some of them are in medicines today, like olanzapine, risperidone. And if you block the 2A receptor, you with a pure antagonist, which was called ritanserin, you get very little subjective effects. You get more slow wave sleep, but you don't they don't stop you functioning. I went to work for 3 weeks with my receptors full of ritanserin, and the only difference I noted was that I was perhaps a little bit slower. My research nurses thought it was great. So I said, tomorrow I'm stopping. They said, no, please don't, because you're a bit calmer. You're a bit less manic. But so there were some effects of the 2A blockade, but not great. But when you stimulate the 2A receptors, you get this profound experience, a psychedelic experience. So why would they be there? And my explanation is this: is that when something really important happens, you've got to register across a large chunk of the brain the implications of that. So let me share this thought with you. the first early human that discovered that you could create fire by rubbing sticks together. He didn't start out rubbing sticks together thinking I'm going to create fire. He started rubbing sticks together, realized it got hot, carried on doing it, created fire. The implication of that, the implication that that would change the whole of his and every other hominin's life, because they could have fire whenever they wanted rather than wait for a lightning strike. The implication of that would have been encoded in this huge chunk of brain, the prefrontal cortex. And that would have been laid down, I'm sure, by activity of the 2A receptors, allowing and the neuroplasticity, allowing a deep encoding of the implications of that discovery. And that's the beginning of kind of human society. Some would argue that fire was the most important technological advance in the history of the world.
So like related to our ability to generalize.
Absolutely, to see the implications, to understand the enormous ramifications and potential of something we've achieved. And then again, the discovery of the wheel, rather than the sledge. Wow, those kind of insights will be laid down by those 2A receptors, and that's almost certainly what they're doing all the time. They're laying down meaning, and that's why when we stimulate them with psychedelics, we can change meaning.
Wow. Thanks so much for that. I really like that insight. One of the next questions here is about art therapy. Is there a framework for art therapy in psilocybin sessions?
Let me be clear. Maybe some of you don't understand this. We don't do any therapy in the session. What we do, and I think what most people do, and the reality is it's almost impossible to do anything else when someone's having a trip, is to allow them to explore, go wherever the medicine takes them, as the indigenous people would say. You follow the medicine. You go inside to your memories, and you close. So we offer people eye shades, headphones, music tracks, and they almost always accept that. I don't think anyone's not wanted to have an eye shade. And to try to intervene during a trip is almost certainly going to be counterproductive. But the therapy we do is afterwards. And I think I'm very interested in the idea of art therapy afterwards, not just as a therapy, but also as a way of sort of allowing people to understand the changes as well. I've spoken with art therapists about this. They wanted to do a study where we could see whether creativity increased after the trip, which is quite likely to do. It was just not possible to raise the funds to do that. So I'm very open-minded to the utility of any therapy afterwards, and it may be that helps us or helps our patients get in better abilities to grapple with and deal with the insights that they get during the trip. So yeah, very open to that kind of approach.
And I suppose that's related to integration, which is the next question. Can you please talk about the current post-dosing integration method? How can clients use these methods to primarily integrate on their own with some support from a therapist?
Yeah, well, excellent question. So there is no consensus as to what the best integration is, and it should be different for different people depending on the insights, the challenges, the memories which come up. We use acceptance, commitment, sort of mindfulness therapy because that seemed to make sense, and it seemed to work quite well. And it's highly recommended anyone who's got a chronic illness or mental illness is trained in that therapy or get some experience in that therapy beforehand, because it's definitely going to be useful in helping prevent relapse. But doing it alone, so if you can do it alone, if you can do it online or with books, that's great. We've discovered that from our first series of two series of patients with depression, that they often come together and form self-help groups. And they do that for two reasons. One is, obviously they've got something in common. And the other thing is that they often struggle when they talk about their experiences with family and friends who've not had the experience. It's very hard. They often people think they're mad because they're talking about experiences that most people haven't had. So self-help groups even could be hugely important. And just as an aside, one of the other areas we're working in terms of kinds of policy is how we can scale up this therapy. And that's particularly relevant particularly in Ukraine. So me and others are doing quite a lot of work with Ukrainian therapists trying to work out how we could scale up both psilocybin and MDMA therapy in a country where you've got 3 or 4 million people traumatized, and that's going to have to be done in groups. It's going to have to be done in some kind of local groups, maybe church-based groups or support-based groups. Um, so, and the other interesting thing, of course, is whether we give the therapy in groups, because that would also be more cost effective. As done typically in South America with the with the ayahuasca ceremonies in groups. So I think group therapy and group healing is something that we've really got to try to get going as fast as possible, where there is a huge amount of trauma. Beyond that, uh, it's difficult. One of the problems we have is that access is so limited, and in the UK, if you're in the NHS, which is by far and away the main provider of healthcare, you've got no choice as to what therapy you get. You get CBT, and if it fails, you get more CBT. And if it fails, they say, well, it's your own fault, so go away and sort yourself out. But even CBT might work after psychedelics. The brain is, it could potentially be, well, the brain is more flexible, and you might be able to utilize. Many patients can't utilize CBT because it involves quite a high level of semantic integration and analysis of thinking. And that's one of the problems with it, because it doesn't actually deal with emotions in a direct way. But I think accessing other therapies is difficult. So but accessing any therapy is difficult, and that must be the same is true for you people in Australia too. So one thing we're doing now, and which I think will interest you, is that we've got 2 ongoing trials. One has just started, and that's psilocybin for heroin addiction. Abstinent heroin addicts are being given psilocybin trip with a view to seeing if you can potentiate and elongate abstinence. So it's a very ambitious study. Abstinence is a really very, very challenging outcome in a heroin addiction. And that started, and it's so far gone well. And then the other is in gambling addiction, where again there are no pharmacological treatments. In fact, there are no treatments that work at all. So we're trying that as well. The reason I'm telling you this is because in the gambling addiction study, we are working with the therapists who are already working with the pathological gamblers. So rather than take them out of their therapy and put them into our research and then give them back, that surgical model, we're saying, come with the therapist will come to the therapy, to the psychedelic therapy with their client, and be part of the treatment, be there, be present, and be part of the integration. And that has huge benefits in demystifying what we do, getting another cohort of therapists actually engaged in psychedelic therapy who've never done it before, because mostly they're using the motivational interviewing and CBT. And then afterwards, carry on the therapy, but hopefully with more effect. So that's an interesting model. And in fact, it's a model which have now persuaded. In fact, David Arizzo has done this. He's persuaded our trust, which is a mental health trust, to bring into the therapy we're doing for treatment-resistant depression, where the psychologists in the trust are bringing the patients who are blocked and locked into, and who they're not making progress with, they're bringing them to the psychopharmacologists like David, and we're using ketamine because we can't use psychedelics. So we're using ketamine to produce a kind of sort of psychedelic experience to help break down some of the rigid thinking. And then those therapists will continue to work with their clients so that they can then effect, hopefully, change in the individuals who've had the ketamine therapy. Now, David has done a pilot study. I think he's got about 12 patients through a course of 6 ketamine sessions. And he tells me it's actually looking quite impressive. There clearly a significant proportion, maybe more than half, are getting a benefit which is accepted and approved, or at least endorsed by the therapists who weren't being successful before. So that's an interesting model, which again would utilize resources which are currently present. You don't have to add resources; you just make the current resources work better.
Mm.
Which is actually it's an interesting metaphor for what psychedelics do, because what psychedelics do is allow people who want to recover to be able to recover. Most people with chronic depression, addiction, they want to change, they can't. Psychedelics loosen up their thinking processes. They break down the ruminations and allow people to use their massive brain capacity in a much better way.
And on a very quick side note, if there's anyone in the call who's done the CPAT course, we offer a similar thing where you can bring your clients to our clinic and work with our clinicians there. So that's another opportunity. The next question is around safety concerns.
Yes.
If there are any safety concerns for psilocybin and MDMA that you have or that you're aware of.
No, I have. Well, I can tell you what we do. Our concerns are almost the only real concern we have is provoking a psychotic experience in people who have got a vulnerability to psychosis. So up till now, we have excluded individuals who have been psychotic, and that's either schizophrenic or manic, fully manic, or people who've got a first-degree relative who's been psychotic. And the reason we do that is we know historically that psychedelics can accentuate delusional states in people who've got psychosis. Beyond that, we also don't use psychedelics in people on lithium because there is evidence that you can provoke seizures. And beyond that, no, there's really, I mean, there are the other potential risks, people with severe medical illness, people with hypertension, cardiac failure, or whatever. But no, I mean, these drugs are extremely well tolerated. I suppose the only practical consideration are people are migraineurs. So I mean, the major side effect of psilocybin in psychedelic therapy generally, but particularly psilocybin and to some extent ayahuasca, is headache, with more than half of the people getting a headache during the trip. No, normally they don't really care about it because what's going on in the trip is much more important than the headache. But there are odd people who say that the headache persists for quite a long time after. But then, of course, there are people with chronic migraines and cluster headaches who do very well. I mean, the headache goes away. So, but you need to just inform people that they may have a headache during the trip.
Okay. And to what degree is psychotherapy essential? Apparently, there's some preliminary data showing benefit with psychedelics alone.
Well, psychotherapy is what doctors do. Even anesthetists do psychotherapy. We know for the last 50 years the outcomes from surgery are better if the anesthetist has spoken to the person they're anesthetizing before they do it and prepared them. So medical interactions are a form of psychotherapy. So I think the question perhaps then is, do we need formalized, detailed, specific psychotherapy is that necessary? And the answer is, we don't know. But I want to be really clear about this. The studies which say they don't do psychotherapy, they do psychotherapy. They just don't call it psychotherapy. They do preparation, they do care during the therapy, during the session, and they do integration. They have to, because that's unethical not to. So they do that. They just don't call it psychotherapy. It's not, but they don't do it in a formal sense. They don't apply a kind of theoretical construct. However, what we do know, and this is also obscured, and it will continue to be obscured by the need of companies to get through the FDA regulations. What we do know is that many of the people who are in these trials are in therapy. Whether they call it, they're in therapy by psychiatrists, treatment-resistant patients. They're in therapy. They're cared for by the team. That they give them the new drug, and they improve, but they're cared for. And that's really important. And this is going to be a huge issue when 5-MeO-DMT comes out, because 5-MeO-DMT is a really difficult drug to use. Really, really difficult. We've just finished the first scientific study of 5-methoxy-DMT looking at brain function. The effects of 5-MeO are so profound that it's very, very difficult even to study people under it. We know that most people who get it have strange and often disabling effects which persist or recur for days or weeks after. If we do not care for those people, this drug will die because issues will be raised publicly, and the companies that promote it, if they don't have essentially a safety net, there will be enormous problems, and that will be a huge issue to the field. So most of these studies are done by individuals who've got chronic depression being looked after by people they know and have looked after them for decades, maybe years anyway. So that is therapy. That's supportive psychotherapy, which is what all psychiatrists do. And so the answer is yes, you need that. Definitely. Do you need more psychotherapy? Well, the answer to that is I think you need what patients want. And it's our experience that very few people who have a psychedelic experience don't want a bit of therapy afterwards. They've been ill for a long time. They've changed. They want to work out how to optimize their recovery. They want to explore the insights, and they want to do it with someone, ideally a therapist, but sometimes with someone else who's had the experience, a co-patient. They want to maximize it. And there's overwhelming evidence that psychotherapy plus any drug treatment in psychiatry is better. So to deny it is, I think, largely done for regulatory rather than health reasons. It's a way of avoiding the problem that the MAPS have with the MDMA, avoiding the FDA saying, well, if you've got to have therapy, we can't monitor therapy, so we can't approve the drug, which is a completely absurd statement to make, but that's the one that was made and has scared the companies. So the answer is it's almost certain that with psychedelics, that therapy will add value. They might have some effects by themselves. I mean, one of the reasons we started in this field, and in fact, before we started this, we started doing depression work because we had done surveys in people going to retreats who said their mood improved, and we'd given psilocybin and LSD in the scanner to people, healthy volunteers who said their mood improved after the trip, even when you get a trip in a scanner. So we thought, well, this could be an antidepressant effect, and obviously the brain changes we saw were actually very supportive of an antidepressant effect. But before us, some of you may know of the John Hopkins, Matt Johnson in Johns Hopkins. He was interested in why people stop smoking. And he did a survey of why people stop smoking. And that was done in the early part of this century. And he discovered quite a lot of people stopped smoking because they had a mushroom trip. He said, oh, that's interesting. I'll try psilocybin if people stop smoking. And then, of course, he did his very famous study, which is now being replicated in a huge multi-center NIDA-funded study. So the answer is yes, people do get benefits even if they take it alone, but we believe benefits will be greater if it's done professionally, and it's certainly going to be a lot safer to do it in an environment where you do have medical care.
Thank you. I think we might have time for one or two more. How are you feeling about that, David?
I can go to 1:15. I got
Okay.
10 more minutes.
Brilliant. The next one in line is about MS, multiple sclerosis, and psychedelic therapy in relation to that.
Okay, so there are two interesting questions there. The first is, can you help remedy the neuropathies? The answer is, I don't know. It's not implausible if we could help people recover from stroke. Let's hope we do. We don't know. It's not inconceivable you could help people recover from the other lesions, the different kind of lesions in MS. The other interesting thing, of course, is that the current best treatments for MS don't even work in the brain. They work on immune cells, and they stop immune cells getting into the brain. And there's growing evidence, and in fact, it's Charles Nichols is doing a lot of work on this. Serotonergic psychedelics are anti-inflammatory. They dampen down immune function. So it's not inconceivable that they might reduce the risks of MS or slow down the recurrence rates in MS by directly targeting the peripheral immune cells. Those studies, I'm sure, are being thought of and will be being done. Everything is so problematic at present because these are all illegal drugs. When these drugs cease to be illegal, we're going to see an explosion of research in other areas. I mean, just for an example, we've now got a grant proposal in to use low doses of psilocybin, a mini dose, in people with chronic heart failure, on the grounds that it might help restore cardiac function and also probably help people cope with the disability that you get if you're chronically tired and fatigued and short of breath.
And what are some reflections that you might have on the value of psilocybin microdosing that have been interesting you lately?
Well, it works if you know you're taking it. And if you go onto the Drug Science website, there's a recent paper we published called a lexicon for psychedelic therapy. And it talks about the different terminologies, including microdosing. Microdosing, we suggest the microdose is a dose which you don't detect, but which still has biological effects. So we know that a 1 milligram psilocybin dose is not detectable. People cannot detect it. We know that it doesn't change the brain because we've done a study that's about to be published on that. And that's why we use it as our placebo in our higher dose studies. However, we also know that if people think they're taking a microdose, they actually feel better than if they think they're not taking a microdose, even when we've randomized between a microdose and pretending it's placebo. So there's a sort of psychological component also to the microdosing. Most people actually, when they microdose, do what I call a mini dose. They take enough so they know they've taken something. And there is some evidence that mini dosing is useful. Theoretically, it could be. It would increase plasticity. It could also reduce anxiety and stress. Might reduce immune function, immune activity. So I'm open-minded, but it's not been properly studied. The best study is the one that's recently, or maybe it hasn't come out yet, but it's coming out from the group in Auckland, New Zealand. They may be on the line. I don't know. The Suresh's group, where they used. I think it was people had a choice of going between about 8 and 12 micrograms of LSD, and they could self-medicate a couple of times a week for mood and anxiety. And they found that there was definitely some effect. It wasn't overwhelming, but in some people it did seem to work. So I think there may, I don't see why a mini dose wouldn't have some effects. It probably just won't be as big an effect as a macrodose, a trip dose. But it's a different model, by the way, of course, because you're taking it repeatedly. And that then gets people into some concerns. What happens if you take them all the time? Do you get tolerance, etc.? Interestingly, they didn't seem to get tolerance, tachyphylaxis to those mini doses, which you obviously do get if you take a macrodose. So there's some different mechanism going on there.
Hmm. So this next one's a bit of a compound question, so bear with me for a second. So Jamie's asking, interested in where you think the future is going with the practice of psychedelic therapy. Considering practitioners are restricted to clinicians in most contexts, do you see inclusion of other types of healers being at a more global level? What is your opinion on types of atmospheres these therapies are conducted, inside a room versus a natural setting?
Yeah, again, really important questions. Safety's got to be the predominant consideration. And just be aware of this. Though we are making progress in terms of getting patients access to these medicines, these drugs are still illegal everywhere in the world, effectively, even in your country. Yeah, the license has been changed, the schedule's been changed, but they're still illegal. The only place they're not really illegal is Latin and South America with the mushrooms and the ayahuasca, and in some American states with the mushrooms. But where they are available, we should treat them with respect, and we should try to use them carefully and optimally, and have people cared for. So have no problem whatsoever in individuals having experiences. We send, well, sorry, we don't send, no, but we allow, we encourage if they want, we may even pay for our therapists who can't have experiences in the UK to go to the Netherlands where they have the truffles, you know. And they go to healing facilities there and they find it very powerful and effective. And it may be more powerful and effective because people who run those healing centers, and one of them is going to be teaching to you, teaching on the course if you're on the course. That's Laura McDonald is a genius in terms of both being a doctor and a healer. So I think you may even get better outcomes with other forms of therapy, better than you might get in a hospital. But if you're talking about people who have got serious illnesses, mental illnesses, I most of the retreats won't take them because they're not therapeutic retreats. They're healing or experiential retreats. So I think it's kind of horses for courses. We need to be sensible and careful and not overstate and not overreach our capacity and capabilities. But I think in the end, psychedelics are going to be they're the biggest revolution in mental health care in the history of the world. I'm pleased to be seeing it happening, and I'm sure it's going to expand. And this is the only way we can transform the current and growing crisis in basically in mental distress and mental illness, which is now the biggest problem across the world. And as Tanya said at the beginning, a huge problem with virtually no investment. Some of you may have, you won't have read, but I wrote a paper in Lancet Psychiatry. The costs of mental illness globally is of the order of about 7 trillion. The costs of COVID were about 11 trillion. The investment in COVID was of the order of 3 or 4 trillion. The investment in mental health, not remotely to a trillion. So basically, it's governments don't want to invest. And if they're not going to invest, we're going to have to do it ourselves. And psychedelics actually are a way in which we can begin to take control over our own destinies in terms of helping people both heal from and also be resilient to mental illness.
Well said. Can I quickly selfishly ask the first part of that question again in terms of what you see the future being with psychedelic therapy?
Yeah, they will be. Psychedelic therapy will become an established frontline therapy in psychiatry. I also believe it will have a much broader role. I love the Oregon experiment. I hope it gets rolled out in other countries. I think wellness centers are also hugely important, where psychedelics are used alongside, as people like Lauren are doing in the Netherlands. People don't go just to have a trip, but they also go to have physical therapy, to do yoga, to learn meditation. They do it to basically develop a better way of coping with life and to improve their quality of their life and also their resilience. I'm sure that will become a significant aspect of Western and maybe more global life over the next 20, 30 years. Wherever people are interested in improving life quality, psychedelics will be central to that.
Hmm. And I can see we're getting pretty close to time. How are you feeling, David? You want to wrap things up or
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
seems about right.
If this is a really pressing question, yeah. They'll hear more of me. They'll get to ask other questions.
Or we'll always be welcome to have you back, David. And did you or Tanya or anyone else want to make any closing remarks?
I've said enough. I'll let Tanya close.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what a font of wisdom. And, we're throwing you all these questions. Ask me anything. That was a pretty daring title to suggest, David. And I'm here with Stephen Proud and Peter, who are both here. And we had to sneak out of dinner because we were so captivated by what you were saying. And we're so grateful to you for everything that you've done for MMA and just everything you've contributed globally in this work. It's just extraordinary. And you mean so much to us. And we just want to thank you for being our friend and supporter. And to all of you that are on this webinar, thank you so much for your support. And in any ways that you can continue to support, to be generous with both donations, but also in terms of supporting events, spreading the word about the upcoming Bessel van der Kolk event. And hopefully we'll have David back in Australia again soon too. So
Well, the last time I came, it worked quite well, didn't it?
it was pretty successful. It was pretty successful. Yeah.
Love
So
to.
big round of applause from everyone in our community. And yeah, we just love you and take care. And we
Thank you
hope to
very
see
much.
you very soon.